In the history of Africa, there have been many great leaders, but there's no match when it came to Gaddafi, a leader that beyond measure took charge and championed the unification of the African continent to ensure that it flourished regardless of the atrocities that it suffered in the last century because of its former colonizers. Muammar Gaddafi, once the leader of Libya, made a big impact on Africa. He worked hard all his life and is famous for wanting to create a United States of Africa. Even though Muammar Gaddafi ruled for 40 years, he still dreamed big for Libya and Africa. His fall from power is a tale of love, money, and betrayal. Yet the legacy he left behind remains extraordinary in the 21st century. Throughout his rule, Muammar Gaddafi displayed a lot of affection for a specific country, its citizens, and its president. However, in the end, it was this very president, whom he regarded as a friend, who betrayed him. Which country and leader are we referring to? The country in question is Uganda, and the leader who betrayed Gaddafi was none other than the Ugandan leader himself, who actively promoted his betrayal. Back in 2016, Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni penned a letter voicing his disapproval of the United States and the African Union's involvement in Libya and the broader Middle East area. He also expressed his belief that the US and the European Union shouldn't have interfered with removing Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein from power in Iraq. But what led to Museveni betraying Gaddafi? Before delving into the reasons, let's first explore how their relationship developed. How did they become friends, and what transpired that ultimately led Museveni to betray his once close ally? Gaddafi's connection with Uganda didn't begin only when Museveni took office. He had been a friend of Uganda for a long time. His deep affection for this country dates back to as early as the 1970s during the regime of Idi Amin. The one providing troops and military aid was none other than Gaddafi himself. However, despite all his support and friendship, it ended with him being betrayed, as you'll soon discover what unfolded. Following numerous attacks and opposition against Idi Amin, he left the country in 1979 and sought refuge in Libya before eventually relocating to Saudi Arabia. After Amin was ousted in 1980, Uganda opted to hold an election to select its new leader. Since the outcome didn't go in Museveni's favor, he reacted like many power-hungry individuals would. He alleged that the elections were rigged and unfair. This led to a civil war in Uganda between Museveni and the opposing factions. In the midst of the war, Museveni and his soldiers faced a shortage of weapons and ammunition. Desperate to win and driven by his hunger for power, he knew he needed assistance. So what did he do? He set out to find help. He reached out to none other than the US and the UK for weapons assistance. However, his request was rejected due to his relationship with Muammar Gaddafi. So he turned to Gaddafi, the closest ally of his nation. Gaddafi didn't hesitate to help. Gaddafi provided him with all the assistance he required, supplying him with military resources, and he emerged triumphant. Gaddafi offered his backing on multiple occasions, including during the Ugandan Civil War of 1986, where Museveni still emerged as the winner. Following Paul Kawanga's Samograrere's defeat, Libya provided military training to Museveni's forces. Museveni was so grateful that he even named his secret intelligence agency after its Libyan equivalent. This demonstrates the depth of affection and support Gaddafi extended to Museveni. Gaddafi made frequent visits to Uganda, making it seem like his second home. He heavily invested in the country, constructing numerous infrastructures. Through the Libyan African portfolio, he invested in Uganda's telecommunications corporation, Uganda Telecom, acquiring 51% of its shares, and also bought 60% of shares in the textile company, TriStar Limited. Gaddafi persuaded Museveni to refrain from selling Uganda's crude oil to Europe and the West. He assured him of assistance in constructing a refinery and pipelines to Kenya and neighboring nations. But that wasn't the end of it. Gaddafi also made significant investments in Uganda's finance and real estate industries. This included his investments in the Tropical Bank of Africa, National Housing Corporation, Lake Victoria Hotel, and numerous other companies. Another important point to mention is that with Museveni's assistance, Gaddafi provided funding to the RPF rebels following their invasion of Rwanda in 1980. This support included weapons flown into Uganda by the Museveni government. Their friendship ran deep, which made the betrayal even more heartbreaking. Let's also explore Gaddafi's interest in the Toro Kingdom. Muammar Gaddafi became intrigued by this kingdom, situated within Uganda's borders in 2001. During this period, the ruler of the kingdom, King Oyomiyimba, was only 9 years old. Due to his profound affection for the kingdom, Muammar Gaddafi funded most of the projects there, including the building of the Toro Palace. Gaddafi left a significant impact on the Ugandan Muslim community. He generously contributed to the construction of a splendid mosque, capable of accommodating at least 3,000 worshippers. This mosque ranks as the second largest in Eastern Africa. Gaddafi once playfully suggested to Museveni that he should rule for life during his visits to Uganda. He even questioned why Museveni bothered with elections at all. During one of his visits, he elevated one of Museveni's sons in the military from the rank of captain to major. Additionally, in the 2001 and 2006 presidential elections, Gaddafi backed Museveni in conducting his campaigns. Their bond appeared solid and resilient, but it didn't hold till the end. What led Museveni to turn against Gaddafi? We'll delve into this in two key aspects: Western interests and Muammar Gaddafi's ambitions. You may already be aware that Muammar Gaddafi is frequently mentioned whenever the concept of a United States of Africa is discussed. His vision for African unity revolves around establishing a United States of Africa. Similar to Juan Nkrumah of Ghana, Gaddafi dedicated significant efforts to the pursuit of African unity. At a summit in 1989, Gaddafi managed to persuade 45 heads of state to endorse the establishment of an African Union, replacing the Organization of African Unity. For over a decade following this, Gaddafi remained the leading advocate for this union. However, in 1989, he introduced the concept of the United States of Africa, envisioning it to have a unified currency and military. According to him, the African Union was supposed to help fulfill his dream. Around 15% of the funding for African Union projects came from Libya during Gaddafi's rule. However, this notion unsettled Western powers and certain African leaders who feared it would undermine their status, influence, and position in the continent. The concept caused division among African leaders. Interestingly, even Museveni was opposed to this idea. Museveni was someone whom Gaddafi had supported greatly in the past, helping him gain significant power in Uganda. Gaddafi had invested heavily in his country and supported him during times of difficulty. What was Museveni's reason for opposing Gaddafi's idea of establishing the United States of Africa? Firstly, it posed a threat to his control over power in Uganda. So, I'm familiar with Mr. Gaddafi's attempts and endeavors to expand his influence in your region of Africa. I'd like to step in cautiously here. While he appreciated Gaddafi's perspective as flattering, he didn't actively support the cause. He was unwilling to be governed by another leader. It was either him or no one else. Furthermore, Museveni's influence was increasingly noticeable in the region. In this role, he aligned with Western interests by participating in military operations in countries like Somalia. He also offered intellectual support to CIA officials. Mr. President, I began opposing the government before you did. Yes, I started opposing the government before you did. However, he prioritized the interests of the West over those of his fellow Africans. When this proposal was eventually discussed at an African Union gathering in Accra, Ghana in 2007, Museveni vehemently opposed it. He was concerned that backing the concept of African unity would cause tensions between him and the Western powers. He knew that these individuals were the ones who kept him in control and had the ability to remove him from power at any time. Museveni was also concerned that betraying Gaddafi would lead to challenges in his military and financial affairs. He understood that standing up against Gaddafi was much simpler than standing up against the West. Museveni's betrayal of Gaddafi was hastened by his responses on June 13, 2008, while attending his son's graduation in the United States. Museveni conveyed his approval to the Assistant Secretary General of State for African Affairs, Genda Fraser. He stated that he didn't see the need for a united Africa because of differences in language and culture. He added that Gaddafi bribed smaller African countries to gain their support, making it challenging for them to voice their opinions during African Union and other global gatherings. Museveni observed that escalating tensions with Gaddafi could lead to an attack on his aircraft while flying through international airspace. He sought assistance from the United States of America, which he indeed received. Gaddafi wasn't particularly concerned about Museveni's ties with America, but rather his popularity in Uganda. When Gaddafi made a surprise visit to Uganda in 2008, Museveni's government viewed it as a planned assault on their president. In a conversation lasting 37 minutes at an Arab youth event in Uganda, Gaddafi changed the subject and expressed his desire to collaborate with traditional leaders instead of elected presidents to accomplish his goals for the United States of Africa. In 2009, he assembled African traditional leaders to discuss the unity of the continent. When Museveni learned of this, he prevented Ugandan traditional rulers from participating in the meeting. Museveni persuaded Gaddafi that the then United States President George Bush would lift sanctions on Libya and invest in his country if he got rid of his weapons of mass destruction. Following discussions with British diplomats, Gaddafi was informed that Museveni had persuaded him to declare and then start dismantling the nuclear and chemical weapons programs. You mentioned at the time that Libya anticipated significant benefits which were very tangible. Many individuals in Libya claim they are still awaiting that advantage. What is Libya anticipating? What do they anticipate from the West? I believe President Bush is a man of his word, but currently we are uncertain about that. What exactly are you expecting the U.S. to accomplish? What issue do you have with President Bush? This was Gaddafi's biggest error that ultimately caused his downfall. He lacked a formidable nuclear arsenal capable of neutralizing domestic forces. Since then, he has been attempting to fill Gaddafi's role in advocating for African unity in finance and security. While he excels in certain aspects, he lacks the charisma and financial resources needed to fully execute this endeavor. Even if he manages to accomplish this, he may not receive support. Even the West may not, for it's the same reason they opposed Gaddafi. During one of his speeches in 2021, Museveni remarked that the agendas of Western powers were limited, which is surprising considering they were the same ones he had convinced to act against Gaddafi. The mosque constructed in Uganda, originally named the Gaddafi Mosque, was renamed 2 years after his removal from power to satisfy the Ugandan government. Now, nearly 2 years after Gaddafi's death, the Uganda Muslim Supreme Council has decided to change the name once again to satisfy the current Libyan government. The only option Museveni had was not to blackmail Gaddafi, as he was the African leader he feared the most. It's clear that when Museveni's time to face consequences arrives, no one will come to his rescue. And that concludes our video on the individual who betrayed Muammar Gaddafi. We hope you found today's video insightful. We would like to know your take on the issue. Let us know in the comments. Feel free to tell us who you want to learn about next on our channel. Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video.
PhD